these aliens. Positively sure I'm absolutely mad about something. Oh, I'm positively sure I'm absolutely crazy too.
Hi, my name is Mark Staller. Welcome to Little Green Man. This is part 5 of our Balance the Budget Doctrine series. Why balance the budgets and austerity? Well, we discovered in the previous videos, and if you haven't seen them, check them out, please. I strongly recommend that. There is no good reason for balancing the budget and for austerity. The neoliberal agenda is really, and it boils down to this, it's corporatization. The end result of austerity is to privatize public services and even destroy public services so corporations can control, run and profit by them. Now, privatization, you may think, good, that'll be the end of taxes, but it actually doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. If you were to say to the public service that we're going to leave it open, anybody can do it, then all's well and good. Maybe there'd be a bit of a free market happening. But what really happens, and what Brian Pallister here in Manitoba is doing, is something called P3. P3, so there as private-public partnerships, mixing public money and private money. That means taxpayers' money with corporation money, so that corporations and companies and the rich people that own them can get profit from running these public services, particularly with schools. There's a link somewhere up there. I did a video on this fairly recently. Check that one out. There are many problems. Now, Brian Pallister has also pushing for privatization of healthcare. And one of the things he suggested, I don't know if he'll follow through with it, is a healthcare premium. So your taxes are actually going up, even though there was a promise, maybe an empty promise of the PST going down. So that's good. That's all well and good then. But will privatization then come to the rescue? Will it make everything better? Because who cares if we're paying taxes if we get the services we need? Who cares who gets that money? Well, will privatization come to the rescue? Well, it hasn't happened for almost 40 years that the United Kingdom and Europe has been doing this. And it's certainly, if we look at one of the most privatized nations in the world, the United States, talking of democratic nations, if we can call it that, they certainly call themselves that, then we can see that privatization leaves the working people with no health care at all, unless they just happen to work for a company that has a healthcare plan, leaving it in the hands of the employer. And many people, about 20%, I think it was, certainly before the Affordable Care Act, there was about 20% of people that did not have any healthcare at all in the US. So privatization really does not work. The UK has demonstrated just very recently, there was news of the privatized rail service that's been going for like 20 odd years, I think it is. Has been privatized, is falling apart, it's a shambles. That now that's failing, and we've got the Labour Party leader is saying that needs to now be brought back into the public sector because it is failing. Now, the downside of all this austerity as well is the political ramifications. People are hurting and they're lashing out. In the UK, Brexit, they wanted to leave Europe. Whether that was the good reason or not is irrelevant. That was the reason, that was what they elected to do. They got to try something different, and the same as in the US, they had to try something different. Would not go with a regular politician. They went with someone who wasn't a politician. Donald Trump, whether he was a good choice or not, we will find out soon enough, I guess. And again, I mentioned this in my last video, that France almost elected a fascist. They just scraped through by the skin of their teeth for not doing, after less than 100 years, about 80 odd years, I think it is right, since they were occupied by those fascist Nazis in the Second World War. So private companies have a proven disadvantage. That's something that they cannot do, that they have to do, rather, that the public sector does not have to do. And that is make a profit. So, if they have income of revenue rather of $1, then they've got to take that 10 cents off the top and then they have 90 cents to spend on giving you a good service. The public sector does not have to do that. They can even run at a loss at times. Now, there is an issue. Well, private companies are better at cutting the red tape, of not having so much bureaucracy. They can just get things done. But that's not true either. Every company that does not have a charismatic leader, every organization, whether it's a company or a church or any organization that has a charismatic leader that built it up, has to departmentalize and has to build its own bureaucracy, or it will fall apart. This is why the Catholic Church is the longest running and probably most stable organization out there, and it's been going for what, not quite 2,000 years, 1,700 odd years, give or take. But that's because it is the world's largest bureaucracy as well. So private companies they have the same level, give or take, above the level of bureaucracy that the governments have. They may be a little bit different, and it might be easier for companies to cut the red tape, but sometimes that red tape, when it's cut, particularly when it's cut carelessly, if in fact it is red tape at all, can end up being harmful to human beings, with companies releasing products that are unsafe, where people can die, particularly regarding, I think it was Chekhov from the new Star Trek movies comes to mind. People are being addicted also, to change the subject slightly, to opium now, with these legal drugs that are on the market now that you can get with a prescription. That is more addictive than heroin, I hear. So we still have these bureaucracies that are going to be in place. So that's not really going to change. The only thing that's different is that private companies have to make a profit. Now, at the best thing that a private company can provide you is things at the same cost. May not be the same quality, but the best they've done. And this is proven that when public services are privatized, at best, the best they can achieve is providing things at the same cost. And usually the service level drops and the service gets worse, but it costs you it will certainly cost you the same money. And what will often happen when governments put out an RFP for a project, whatever it is, the lowest bidder gets the job, and then they say, we can't do it, we need more money. This happens all the time, particularly in construction, and it will happen exactly the same in public services. Now, the problem with privatization is that as governments, who are supposed to be answerable to us, the private companies are not answerable to anybody except their owners, whether they have a single owner, a board of directors, or shareholders. However it's organised, they are not democratic by nature. They are authoritarian by nature. So you and I and the government will lose control completely. Because they're private companies, they can say, this is proprietary information, you can't know what it's about. And we've seen this already with the attempts at privatising the healthcare, when Brian Pallister hiring KPMG, who won't release their data on the survey of Manitoba. So we don't even see what that data is, because lack of transparency. They can do what they like, and we cannot defend ourselves from that kind of thing. And one of the other things as well is that there's a level of inflexibility. Is that when, if talking about schools, if there's an influx of people coming into the community, maybe more people have been born several years before, a flood of children coming into the schools, private companies cannot cope with that because they're too busy taking the profit off the top and not investing that money or saving that money to build up or to be able to be flexible enough to cope with changes. And almost always, even in private companies where services have been outsourced to India, for instance, like call centers and so on, everybody tries it because it seems cheaper, but they almost always are pulled back in-house and brought closer to home because of that lack of control and the service level that fails. So privatization is never the answer. It is failing right across the world to provide the level of service that the public sector can do it. So what then will the future hold then for a continued balance the budget? Well, I'm going to answer that in part 5. And spoilers, it doesn't look good. Little green man. This is the back door to the Manitoba legislator. Now, if you hit the subscribe button now, hit the notification bell, then you won't be surprised when they try to stick something up your back door. Hi, my name is Mark Starr. Welcome to Little Green Man. This is part 6 in our 7-part series on the balanced budget doctrine. And we're going to go back to where we started. Right early on is the debt, the provincial debt, or the national debt, government debt. In general, is it bad? Well, David Campbell, University of Manitoba Associate Professor, says balancing the budget is not a solution because national debt can be easily managed as long as revenue remains high enough to cover the payments. Debt can mean when times are hard, there will be more infrastructure, more social services, healthier and hopeful people because of the stronger, more resilient economy. An economy that for once would favour them as well. So debt isn't a bad thing at all. It's something, if you can make the payments, there is no issue at all. The only problem in the real world with debts in the private world, whether that's business or personal, the only time debt is a problem is if you find yourself without enough money to pay the debt. The same thing is true with governments. Now, debt is actually an investment. I mean, we look at that with our houses. We got out of our way to get mortgages for our houses. Well, we're in debt for it can be up to 25 years now. The mortgages have gone up. That's far. The houses are becoming so expensive that we can go that far into debt, and we don't really blink an eyelid at it because we need somewhere to live. We've got to spend our money. We may as well put that money into a house. It's an investment of sorts. Now, businesses take on loans as well, and it's not bad. It's not a bad thing. Particularly business startups, they take loans if businesses want to expand and they don't have all that money up front, that they can convince the bank to lend them the money because it's an investment. It will lead to something better down the road with more income. Now, this rule applies to governments as well. Now, Mark Blythe said to the US Senate in 2015, now Mark Blythe is the Eastman Professor of Political Economy, the Watson Institute for International Studies and Brown University. And he said, debt is investment, even public debt. It is not a deadweight loss, and without it, we would never have the industries that we have today. So then how does the future look? Well, to be fair, it doesn't look good at all. Well, the next recession is right down the road. It's imminent. It's going to happen at any time. And it's going to be bad. And this isn't just me, who you might think is a bit of a left-winger. I'm actually going to be quoting from a right-winger, Charles Lamman, L-A-M-M-A-M, Director of Fiscal Studies at the Fraser Institute. So they don't get any more conservatively right-wing than the Fraser Institute. And he's been quoted in a Maclean's article, Maclean's.ca. There is a note in the description. Now, nearly a decade removed from the last recession, and experts think another is imminent. This time, however, we're in a much more precarious financial situation. If we hit another economic road bump and recession happens, there's some real concern that we won't be prepared to deal with those issues, says Lamman. It's a real possibility. Now, with the housing bubble looming, and the car debt about to go, the car debt bubble about to pop, we also have a serious debt bubble from from people. So we've gone out of our way to just try to keep our standard of living at a decent height. And personal debt is also massive now, that to the point now that the majority of Canadian families, if they get a bill that's just a few $100s, I mean $500, $1,000, it would mean complete and total financial ruin for them. Not prepared for any movement at all, and it could be, and it's going to be, really disastrous if and when that bubble pops, and bubbles, the very nature, will pop. There's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So, then if austerity and balancing the budget that got us to this point are not the answer, well then, what is the answer? Well, you're going to have to wait for part 7 of this series. So part 7 and the final part of the Balanced Budget Doctrine here on Little Green Man. Little Green Man. This is the back door to the Manitoba legislator. Now, if you hit the subscribe button now, hit the notification bell, then you won't be surprised when they try to stick something up your back door. Hi, my name is Mark Staller. Welcome to Little Green Man. This is the 7th and final episode in our series of the Balanced Budget Doctrine. So, if austerity, balancing the budget, is not the answer, then what is? Well, both Lemon and Joffe, now I'll explain who those are. Charles Lemon, Director of Fiscal Studies at the Fraser Institute, which is a right-wing conservative think tank. Can you have a left-wing conservative think tank? I don't know, but conservative think tank. Mark Joffe, Director of Policy Research at California Policy Center, a US, the US little organisation there that is also right-wing. So here we go. This is what the right-wingers are saying. This is from an article in Maclean's. You'll see the source in the description. Both Lemon and Joffe agree that governments should make greater efforts to run substantial surpluses during flush times and put those funds towards their capital spending and debt payments. So not austerity all the time. The right-wingers, at least these right-wingers here, are saying build up, when things are good, save that money and you can use that to pay off the debts. Not balancing the budget every step down the road, but bringing in a surplus and then paying that off. That's their solution. Now, I'm now going to take this a step further. I'm going to suggest that instead of pretending to run government like a business and balancing the budget, which I showed right at the very beginning of this series, is a lie. Businesses and families do not run a balanced budget. They don't even attempt to do it. So why make governments do it? Well, I'm going to turn that around. Let's actually run governments more like actual businesses actually do. Not wholly, but more like it. Let's forget about balancing the budget. Let's pretend that isn't even a thing. And then we can make every effort to run a surplus when times are good, so that we're bringing in more money than we're spending when times are good. And then when times are good, we can do exactly what those people there, or those right-wingers I quoted earlier, Lemon and Joffe, both said, and when times are good, let's start paying off that debt with some of that surplus. Absolutely, let's do that. We should then take one step further, and Mark Blythe and Richard D. Wolff and other economists have said this all along. You've got to spend when times are bad. So you can go into debt to spend when times are bad. That will help stimulate the economy. I'm going to take that a little bit further, is that if we have enough surplus and we keep some surplus there, a rainy day fund, a lot of families and businesses have a rainy day fund of sorts, and some local governments do as well, but we can have a rainy day fund. Instead of going into debt, we just use that rainy day fund that we built up during those good times, and we use that to stimulate the economy, and then maybe there'll be a little bit of a gap that we may need to borrow just a little bit to get us through the slump. So good management of public services, that's an essential. No one's arguing that isn't good. Let's get rid of trim the fat between where it needs to, but keep the regulations that keep people safe in place. Let's keep the regulations that keep people from being ripped off in place, but we can make it easier for government to get things done without making it a horrible and disastrous system. So just good management, smart management, that will provide us value for money for our taxes. So we pay your taxes and you get a good value for money in return. That we then don't cut willy-nilly. We just, cutting isn't a religion. It must have a demonstrable and proven purpose to cut. There must be a way of demonstrating that this is going to make things better and not make things worse. I'm going to jump in and say absolutely no privatization of public services. Things that people need to survive, that need to live, that benefit everybody must never ever be privatized. It must be brought in-house and stay there. No P3 partnerships, no partial funding from corporations and from rich people. All of it to be generated controlled by the private sector. Absolutely no selling off of the commons, never giving it away. So there's oil under the ground. Don't ever give it to corporations. They have to pay for it if we allow them to take it out at all. No giving away of the airwaves. They have to pay for that because that is part of us. If I want to now take on broadcasting, even just in a small area, I've got to pay for a license for it. If big companies don't have no restrictions in that area, well, the airwaves will be completely clogged, and there'll be no chance for me or even a small business wanting to jump in. That's why we have some of those laws in place. I'm not giving them away, making sure that the rents are high enough so that profits are high for the businesses, but that we are not getting ripped off as the owners of these resources and of these spaces. Governments should stop borrowing from private banks wholesale. Pay off the debt, walk away from the private banks, and borrow from your own state banks and your own financial systems instead of the private. No interest should be given to private people because they won't pay their taxes. If they don't pay a fair share of taxes, they shouldn't be getting any interest from any loans that they give to the government. So that private citizens and private companies can be paying their fair share of taxes, and then if government needs to borrow money, they will be borrowing the money from itself, from its own state bank, controlled by the people, and benefits for the people and not for a handful of rich people. The balanced budget is a myth. Your tax dollars, in the end up in the pockets of the people who already have more than they can possibly spend. When you privatize, your tax dollars are going to them. When you still pay your taxes, but the service is getting cut, you're the one that ends up having to pay the price, both financially and with cut, and services being cut and whittled away. So the balanced budget really is not a conspiracy theory to make rich people richer and poor people poorer. It's actually a conspiracy fact. It can be demonstrated clearly. The evidence is in. Now, will we get a fair hearing? Well, that's up to us to push those people in power. It's something that we need to push our local representatives, our MPs, our MLAs, and we need to push for them to look after the public sector, to look after the commons, those things and those areas that belong to us, the people. Balance the budget not only is the wrong way to go, it is absolutely disastrous, and it will lead us to absolute and abject ruin. Let's use some common sense. It hasn't worked for 40 years. Let's change our tactics. Little Green Man. This is the back door to the Manitoba legislature. Now, if you hit the subscribe button now, hit the notification bell, then you won't be surprised when they try to stick something up your back door.